One of your clients, right before he died, was Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there's been a whole below. The president says, "Why do you make such a big deal about him?" And they're saying there was nothing complicit in his death, and he didn't have a list. You were in touch with him right before he died. So, do you believe what they're saying without proof that he committed suicide, that it wasn't murder? Didn't somebody get to him?
I've never believed that he committed suicide for two main reasons. One, anecdotally, as you say, I met with him 9 days before he died. He had been calling since his arrest to have me come and meet with him, but he had a whole battery of top-notch lawyers, so I figured he was set. But his in-house counsel then called me, and I was very flattered. Quite frankly, he said that he has to see you, that you're the only person in the world he trusts with his life. So I went up there to see him 9 days before he died, and we came to an agreement that I would take over the case. I did it subject to meeting with his current lawyers, or I would put my own team in, and I had already lined up a team to bring in. His lawyers were hesitant about meeting with me, but I wanted them to hear from him that he wanted me to take over the case and all that. Anyway, but so anecdotally, 9 days before he died, we planned a whole strategy to fight the case. He was in good spirits, and I was in touch with some of the local lawyers who had been visiting him in between. They had asked me to take over a bail hearing that he had coming up, and I was hesitant to do that because I didn't like the record they had made earlier. But that Friday, he died on a Saturday. The Friday before, the lawyers tell me he was giving out instructions based on the strategy we had worked out. And he had also asked me to do another task for him that was only forward-looking. So the idea that a couple of days later he would have killed himself doesn't make sense. But more importantly, Michael Baden, who I believe to be the foremost medical examiner in the world, who was New York City medical examiner, went through the medical examination after his death with the assistant New York medical examiner. Dr. Baden has said that in all of the tens of thousands of autopsies and medical examinations he's done, he has never seen injuries like this consistent with a suicide. Secondly, he said the medical examiner who went through the examination with him, the city's person, said that she found it inconclusive. She couldn't come to any conclusion about cause of death, but 4 days later, they called it a suicide without any additional information. The size and layout of the cell also doesn't make suicide likely. Based on a couple of calls I get afterwards from other inmates, doesn't make suicide likely. But I don't have a theory as to who killed him. I don't have a conspiracy theory. Others do. And usually in this situation, if someone were killing him to make a name for himself because he was a sexual offender, that sort of thing, then that person would generally want to take credit for it. That hasn't happened here. So I don't know the full answer, but my belief is that he did not commit suicide.
So what do you make about the fact that the director of the FBI and the Justice Department are saying there's no conspiracy here, he committed suicide? Obviously, from what you just pointed out, including the medical examination afterwards, shows that there is something more to the story. Why do you suppose all of a sudden they've changed their tune? And have you been in touch with anybody regarding that?
Right. Well, it's not really all of a sudden. In other words, the New York medical examiner eventually came out with a statement that it was suicide. The Justice Department has taken the position that it was suicide. This is just coming up now because, people have been asking for the so-called Epstein file, this client list and that sort of thing. And so it came out contemporaneously with that. In terms of the so-called client list, now the Justice Department has said there isn't any client list and there's no evidence of any conspiracy to blackmail people or plan to blackmail people by Epstein. I don't find any of that surprising. I would not have thought that he had any kind of client list. He had a number of wealthy and prominent friends who certainly traveled around with him, went to events with him, visited him, and so on. And shame on those people, by the way, for sort of denying that after the fact when he came out, when he got charged. They certainly benefited from their friendship with him at the time. But I'm not surprised by any of these things. And I quite frankly, I agree with President Trump. I'm not sure why this has become, the biggest agenda item. And you see some of these guys now even turning against their former friends, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and all of that, and saying they must be holding something back. And Elon Musk came out with something a couple of weeks ago in which he said that the reason they're not turning it over is because Epstein had some bad information about President Trump. I felt compelled at that time to come forward. That I knew for a fact wasn't the case. I had discussed it, Mr. Epstein, as something that he wanted to bring forward. He didn't like people being falsely accused of things, especially people who had been friends at some time. As you may know, there'd been a falling out with President Trump. President Trump had kicked him out of his club down there, and so on. So I came out with that, and it got 11 million views on Twitter or X, whatever it's called. And then President Trump reposted it. That's the case. I mean, if anyone to suggest that this isn't being turned over because there's bad information about President Trump is simply wrong.
Well, what do you suppose? Because what you said is very credible. Whether it was, you look at the report after he died and his state of mind when you were going to become his attorney. So why are they, you suppose, and this is a different Department of Justice than the original, a different FBI director, different personnel. You would think that they would want to get this story out and they want to release the file. And I haven't seen anything come out yet. But the fact is, though, why do you suppose? It seems like there's a cover-up. It seems like there's a change. Something is in the air.
I just don't understand it, quite frankly, unless it's just they want to finally put it to bed. They don't want any more of this, stuff hanging out there. They were convinced that, look, all we can say it was a suicide. We can't say otherwise. We don't have we don't have a perpetrator in mind. Yes, there were some lapses in security at the MCC where he was. Cameras weren't working. The guards were negligent and so on. But we don't have evidence. Let's put this to bed and move on. That may be as simple as that. It may be as simple as that. I just don't know. They're certainly taking a lot of flack for it now. So
because the reason why, because what they know. I'm sure they've seen the medical examiner's report and they know about what you said. So that's what makes it more puzzling to me.
It is interesting, though, you raised that, because I just made this comment today. It is a little surprising to me, if you're trying to determine the cause of death and whether it was a suicide, that I was never interviewed by the FBI or the Department of Corrections.
Oh, interesting.
And here they know from their records that I met with him just days before. And they certainly know from the media that he had tried to hire me to, be his lead counsel going forward.
Because here's the other thing too. You're saying he, as far as you know, there was no official list of his clients. Is that correct?
That's what I believe. I never knew about any such list.
Did you ever ask him about it?
Kept it. He wasn't the type of person. I know people think he's a monster. He was not the type of person, from my experience with him, to want to blackmail somebody else in this. He enjoyed his friendship with these wealthy and so-called prominent people.
But is it possible, even though he didn't have an official list written down, since it was in his mind, he knew who he was, so maybe people were afraid that it would come out in some course of time of his trial? So there is an incentive for some people who may want to have gotten rid of him.
That's true. The flip side of that is, if he had this information about prominent people, he had every incentive to bring it out, to help himself in his case, to try to make a deal, of that nature. And that wasn't in the cards for him.
Now, you mentioned that he wanted to use you. He trusted you. How did he know about you? What made him say, I trust you more than my other counsel?
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer the last question, but about 10 or 12 years earlier, through a mutual friend, he had called me. He had asked the friend if he could call me. The friend suggested me. And he asked just what it would be like for him to go to jail. He was going to the local jail for a few months, that sort of thing. And he wasn't, at that time, so happy with his lawyers. He continued on with most of the same lawyers. He fired some of them, but he had a whole battery of them, some of the best-known criminal lawyers in the country. So during the course of the year before he died, he got back in touch with me. He had been in touch with me maybe once a year, or if that even, since the first contact. But the year before he died, they were trying to reopen the case against him in Florida because the victims had not been properly notified about the plea deal that he made. He had one lawyer who's shocking to me, put out an email that said essentially to the prosecutor something like, let's make sure the victims never find out about this. That's crazy. There's a federal statute that requires notification of the victims. Anyway, so that upset him, that the lawyer, did that kind of thing. So he asked me to start reviewing the papers that his lawyers were filing in that case. I suggested to him that he not tell the lawyers I was doing that because they would resent it and maybe not act in his best interest then. So he didn't. And we just communicated about that. And then let's say he died, around early August. In about March or April, he asked me if I could come to his home. I did. I happened to be in New York. And it's actually the first time I ever met him in person. We've been talking about email and chats and on phone for a long time before then. Went to his house in New York, and he asked me to take over his litigation. I said, I'm not really in a position to do that at that time. But we talked a lot about it. And interestingly, maybe your viewers be interested, he asked me to stay to meet his lunch guest. So I said, look, I'm here to talk about a criminal case, possible criminal case. I don't think you want me meeting your lunch guest. He said, no, I want you to meet him. So I went downstairs, and waiting by the dining room table was Ehud Barak.
Oh, wow.
They were in business together. And interestingly, Jeffrey Epstein had like a photo array by his dining room. And one of them was a picture of a homeless guy from one of the New York papers. And the headline was about how that was Ehud Barak leaving Jeffrey Epstein's home. It wasn't, but he put it up as kind of a joke. Somehow they got wind of the fact that Ehud Barak had been to his place. And so they took a picture of this homeless guy. They thought it was Ehud Barak hiding and all of that. So anyway, so look, we just kept in touch. And then, he kept calling me before the criminal case even broke to see if I would take over his litigation. I just kept saying no, but let me think about it and that sort of thing. Then the night he got arrested, I got a call. Could I go see him at the MCC? I couldn't at that time. And then one of his lawyers called me and said he would set up a local guy to go see him. And from that point on, for the next 3 weeks or so, I just felt, look, let these guys handle it. I don't want to just show up there as a third wheel sort of thing, fifth wheel, whatever they call it. But the in-house counsel kept calling, and finally just said, look, he really needs to see you. So I went up and saw him.
Now, you had represented Donald Trump, the president of the United States, in the second impeachment hearings. Are you still in touch with the president?
Yes, I am to some extent. Yeah, I am.
Did you ever have a conversation about him and Jeffrey Epstein? Did it ever come up in a conversation?
No, but first of all, I wouldn't talk about any specifics of conversations I had with him generally, but no, that never came up. And remember, I represented Epstein long before I met Donald Trump. That was 2019. I met Donald Trump just before they called me 2 weeks before the impeachment trial.
Right. No, I thought in subsequent conversation, if it ever came up.
No.
Thank you for watching. If you like this content, you like our programs, please like and subscribe, as it helps the channel get these important conversations out there to a larger audience. So please become a supporter of Talkline with Zev Brenner by liking us, by supporting us, and telling all your friends to watch. Thank you.